Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Yutet. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran women of Long Island in honor of the bar mitzvah of Aiden Lichtman, son of our friend and co-learner Sharon Gavin Lichtman in Jerusalem. May Aiden and the entire family continue to give you and Jay much nachat, channeling your love of learning, passion for justice, and search for truth. Mazal tov. Okay, with that, we're going to get started on daf Yutet. So we saw in yesterday's daf, we ended with this idea that you have to put the kohen has to put his belt in a particular spot, not too high, not too low, because that's where people sweat. We're going to finish up this topic by hearing a story. Amar Rav Ashi, Amar li Huna bar Natan. Rav Ashi tells a story that someone else told him. Huna bar Natan was one of the exilarchs, which makes sense. That you were going to see he was together with the Persian king. Zim nachad havakim nakame de Izgadar Malka. Okay, not only that, but Izgadar Malka was a Persian king. It's also known that he married one of the daughters of the exilarchs. I don't know if it was Huna bar Natan or not, but he obviously was well connected with the exilarchs, had a good relationship with them. Okay, so Huna bar Natan says he took my belt, and he lowered it down basically. It says about you're supposed to be a kingdom of kohanim, meaning you're all supposed to act like kohanim. You shouldn't put your belt in the place where you sweat. It's not respectful. When I got before Amemar and told him this story, he said, in other words, Huna bar Natan was still the one talking. This is all Rav Ashi quoting. Huna bar Natan said, so when I got to Amemar and I told him the story, he told me the pasuk, the kings will be your trainers. They'll teach you things that you fulfill that pasuk basically, because here you got advice from a king, no less other than a Persian king. Moving on. Tananatam. Now we're quoting a Masechet Eruvin, which at first glance seems to have nothing to do with our topic at all, but we're going to see how we connect it. There's a whole issue with medicine on Shabbos, okay, without getting into all the details and certainly not posking halachically on when yes, when not, but you're in general not supposed to do things for medicinal purposes on Shabbat, okay? There's different kinds of things, different levels. If you're going to draw blood, that's for sure a problem because that is an asur midora. It's an isur doraita. One of the malachot, it comes from shochet, where blood comes out, or perhaps mefarek. There's a whole different debate about what it comes from, but that's isur doraita. There's also isur dorabanan, which is we're worried if you take medicine on Shabbat, for example, or we're going to see today putting on bandages, that you might come to grind up herbs to make, because that's how you make medicines. So the rabbis forbade all sorts of anything you do for medicine, although not everything. There's exceptions to the rule, and depending on how sick you are and all that, without getting into that. But as a general, let's just talk about the general prohibition, midrabanan, rabbinic prohibition, not to do things for medicinal purposes because you might come to grind herbs to prepare medicines. So there's a Mishna. It's actually an Eruvin, not a Masechet Shabbat. We know in Eruvin there's a lot of issues in Masechet Shabbat in there. Kohen shalaka be'etzbo. If you have a kohen who's working in the temple and he gets an injury on his hand, I'm thinking of, all the slaughtering and all that. It could happen, right? Like kitchen injuries. Korech alav gemi. So what do? You put a reed around the wound. Now, we're talking about on Shabbat. Now, they say, b'mikdash, this is allowed to be done in the temple. Why is it allowed in the temple? Because theoretically, it should be prohibited on a rabbinic level. But the rabbis, if you remember, shvut is permitted in the mikdash. Shvut is an isur d'Rabbanan. We allow on Shabbat to do prohibitions that are rabbinic, because the mikdash overrides. Okay, we need the kohen to work in the temple, so he's allowed to do that because it's rabbinic. Avaloba medina, but if this happens to a kohen or anybody else outside the temple, certainly not allowed. Ve'im lo tzimi menu dam, but if he's putting on the reed bandage, the bandage made of reeds, to pull out blood, that's a problem because that's doraita. Kam v'kan asur. It doesn't matter whether he's in the temple or whether he's outside the temple; it's going to be prohibited. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'rei Rabbi Chiya. So now comes Rabbi Yehuda, okay, the son of Rabbi Chiya. And here I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I'm going to show you the study guide for today just on this section. So now we're going to go to, one second. Okay, we're going to go to the study guide. Now here, second, wrong way. Okay, so now we're going to see in the study guide that there's going to be a big debate here. Okay, so now we're going to look at this chart. So Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Chiya, says, Lo shanu ela gemi. He talks about this. Now he all of a sudden relates this issue to our issue. He says, what were we talking about? So yesterday's daf we talked about you can't wear more than the kohen garments are supposed to be. Okay, anything more is a problem. So only the Kohen's garments, not anymore. So now he says, Lo shanu ela gemi. Now this Mishnah here in Eruvin wasn't relating to this, but obviously it's saying you can put on like a band-aid type thing. But tziltzul katan havi yitor b'gadim. So he limits this issue and says, when it says gemi, it means only from reeds. But if you're going to put like a sash, a small sash on your finger, which is really made as a cloth, then that's yitor b'gadim. The Kohen Gadol is basically wearing an extra garment. Now, notice, okay, and we didn't make this distinction yet, but you see from the chart, there's a distinction. Bimkom gadim or shalom bimkom gadim. What does that mean? Well, the finger is not a place where the Kohen generally has a Kohen garment on the finger, right? So there's no garments the Kohen wears on his fingers. He doesn't wear gloves or anything like that. So this is obviously talking about, okay, he says there's going to be a problem of yitor b'gadim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Chiya, even in a place where the Kohen doesn't normally wear begadim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, what are you talking about? Lo amru yitor begadim, ela bimkom begadim. Aval shelo bimkom begadim lo havi yitor. If it's not a place where the Kohen generally wears clothes, so there's no problem with wearing extra garments. Extra garments is, we saw yesterday, if you wear 2 pairs of pants, or right, I don't remember what's off, but if you wear 2 pairs of pants, it's a problem, right? If you wear, right, I think it was yesterday. Anyway, if you wear 2 pairs of pants, it's a problem. That's in the place where you have clothes. But it's not a problem if you wear something where you don't normally wear clothes. Okay, so it sounds like he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda B'Reid Rabbi Chiya, although we might suggest later he doesn't. So right now, Rabbi Yochanan says, Yitor B'Gadim is only a problem when you're not wearing, in the place where clothes are normally worn. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question of Rabbi Yochanan. V'tepuk le'mishum chatzitza. Wait a minute. There's a third problem, okay? First problem was doing something for Shabbat. We resolved that. We said as long as it's the Rabbanit, we don't worry about it because you're in the temple. Second problem, wearing extra garments. Third problem, what about chatzitza? When the kohen, okay, so the kohen has something on his finger. Now, you're not allowed to have a chatzitza between your body and the avoda. So, for example, the feet have to be on the floor. We talked about that's why kohenim don't wear shoes in the temple. What about holding a kli, right? You're holding a kli kodesh. You have a band-aid on your finger, right? That's going to be a chatzitza. So how can you do that? So we have 2 possible answers. Either bismol, maybe he was using his left hand, okay? And the wound was on his left hand, so it's not a problem because he's holding the vessel in his right. Inami shalom kom avodah. Or maybe it was on the back of his hand, right? If it's on the palm of his hand, so it would be a chatzitza. If it's on the back of his hand, no chatzitza. Okay, so we resolved the chatzitza issue. Back to our main issue of yitor b'gadim. Upliga de Rava. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara tells us, disagrees with Rava because Rava actually thinks there is a problem, shalom b'mkom begadim. Okay? He just differentiates about what size item creates a chatzitza in the plate. Is a problem of yitor begadim, of extra garments, where you wear your clothes and where you don't wear the kohen clothes. Okay? So he's going to have the same distinction, but he's going to say that there is yitor begadim, shalom b'mkom begadim. It's just a little bit different than b'mkom begadim. To Amar Rava Amar Rav Chisda. Rava said the name of Rav Chisda. Bimkom begadim afilu nima achad chotzetzet. Even one string is a chatzitza if the kohen has a string on his body, okay, you have like a little string wrapped around his body, let's say, on his stomach, okay, where normally he wears, both the cloak and maybe you could even say the belt, right, depending on where. But okay, that's going to be a chatzitza. But if it's not in the place where the clothes go, then it needs to be 3 by 3 fingers. Okay? The width of 3 by 3 fingers. Okay? Any less than this is not significant enough, but 3 by 3 fingers is already enough to create a chatzitza. To create a yitor b'gadim. Okay? To be a problem of why I keep getting confused? Because they say chotzitzot. They don't really mean a chatzitza. It's a little bit confusing because I said there's 3 issues here. But what it means is it creates another garment. Okay, this is a problem. Okay, this creates a problem. So now of extra clothes. Okay, so now they say ad Rabbi Yochanan vadai pligi. Ad Rabbi Yehuda. Oh wait, did I get to 1 second? Right. So now they say ad Rabbi Yochanan. 1 second. Right. Okay. I wrote this wrong on the chart. Now I just realized. Okay. This is a Sheila on Rava, not on Rabbi Yochanan. Okay. My mistake. So now they say, Adu Rabbi Ad Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya. Ad Rabbi Yochanan badai pligi. Okay, so for sure Rava disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. That's for sure. Ad Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya milema de pligi. But does Rava disagree for sure with Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya? Okay, it's not right, because why not? Shani tziltzul katan dechashiv. Now, again, Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya said shalom kom gadim. You can put, right, gemi is allowed. Tziltzul katan is not allowed, right? That's yitur begadim. Now, tziltzul katan is going to be less than 3 by 3. So now the question is, does Rava disagree with that point? Because he thinks it has to be 3 by 3 etzbaot. And tziltzul katan, this little sash on your finger, is definitely less than 3 by 3 fingers, right? Imagine something on your finger, it's going to be less than 3 by 3. It's very small. So at first glance, they think he disagrees, but then they say, no, wait a minute. He said you need shalosh al shalosh for it to be a problem, right? For it to be yitur begadim. 3 by 3, that's the issue. Why 3 by 3? Because that shows importance. But sometimes you can have something that also shows importance that isn't size. And that's a sash. You put a sash on your finger, that already has significance. So that's a significant item, and therefore even Rava might agree, or maybe even the Gemara is saying he does agree with Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya. So while it's clear that Rabbi Yochanan and Rava disagree, it's not, right? It's not 100% clear, and in the end they say it doesn't really seem like Rava disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya. Okay? For sure Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with him, because Rabbi Yochanan says there's no yitur, right? There's no problem. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says tziltzul katan is a problem, right? And Rabbi Yochanan says there is no problem. Shalom kom gadim. Okay, that was version 1. Now we're going to move to version 2. Okay, further down on your page, Lishna Achrina. So here's the second version. Lishana Achrina. So some people say that Amar Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya lo shanu elagemi aval tziltzul katan chotzetz. Now this is the exact same as before, except he uses the language chotzetz instead of yitur begadim. But even though, as I said before, chatzitza is a different issue, we really mean yitur begadim here. Okay, nobody thinks he means chatzitza. Okay, again, what's a chatzitza? An interposition between the kohen and the work he's doing. That's not what we're talking about here. Even though, right, just like before, Rabbi used the language of chatzitza, but he didn't mean chatzitza, he meant yitur begadim. So now, Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya says, only gemi, but tziltzul katan is a problem. Okay, same as before. Rabbi Yochanan amal. Now, Rabbi Yochanan clearly disagrees with him, and he comes as a reaction, and he says, lo amru chatzitza, just like in the previous one. Lo amru chatzitza b'pachot mishalosh al shalosh ele b'nkom begadim. What does this sound like? Oh, this sounds like Rava from before. Right, that's what Rava said, the shalosh al shalosh. So now, and as you see from the chart, Rabbi Yochanan and Rava say the same thing. Okay, so listen. Rabbi Yochanan says, we didn't say chatzitza, in other words, b'chachom b'shalosh al shalosh, ele b'mkom begadim. You say tziltzul katan is a problem, but, right, aval shelo b'mkom begadim, shalosh al shalosh chotzitzot. In other words, when in it, so again, lo amru chatzitza b'chachom b'shalosh al shalosh, any small amount is going to be a problem, but where? In the place where the kohen wears the clothes. That's when you're going to have a problem of wearing an extra garment that's even smaller than 3 by 3. But shelo b'mkom gadim shalosh shalosh chotzetzot pachomikein ena chotzetzet. But you can't say this tziltzul katan is chotzetz because it's not a place where you normally wear garments, and there it's only 3 by 3. So Rabbi Yochanan is clearly disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chiya, and the Gemara says, and by the way, in this case, as opposed to saying he disagrees with Rava, in this case he doesn't disagree with Rava, Hainu de Rava de Amar of Chisda. Now Rava he wasn't part of this whole conversation. The conversation was really between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Right, Rabbi Yochanan was reacting to Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya. But they're saying, by the way, Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Rava because this is exactly what Rava said. Okay, somewhere else. So now, again, they're back to asking on Rava. Lema pligia de Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rabbi Chiya. Do you think that Rava is cholek also on Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Chiya? Does he, right? No. Again, what do we say? Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda and says, what are you talking about? Tziltzul katan. Tziltzul katan is definitely not a problem. You think it is? I think it's not. Now, Rava theoretically should say tziltzul katan is not a problem because it's not shalosh al shalosh. But he didn't come up in this conversation to which the Gemara says, yeah, it's because and I don't know if that's because, but he doesn't necessarily disagree, or maybe even doesn't disagree. Because again, as we answered in the first one, Shani tziltzul katan dechashiv. He thinks a small sash has significance. So even though it's not 3 by 3, it's still significant enough to be considered an extra garment. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan doesn't think so, but Rava does. Ula Rabbi Yochanan, last question. My area gemi lishmin and tziltzul katan. Well, let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, kohen who has a problem with his finger, put on a gemi, right? Now, why didn't it say put on a tziltzul? If even a tziltzul is not a problem, according to him, it should have said, put on even a sash. They want to teach you something along the way, which is, a reed is actually something that heals. A sash is not. So they just wanted you to know, and again, I remember the whole context there was medicinal issues. And that's why they're telling you, you can put on a gemi even though it heals, you're allowed to put it on for the other reason. I didn't need to talk about the tziltzul because the topic there wasn't yitor begadim. Now, obviously, you can't say put it on in the mikdash if it's going to be a problem of yitor begadim. So you'd have to say it's not. But it doesn't mean you had to say tziltzul katan because, right, first of all, that wasn't even the topic of the Mishnah there, yitor begadim. Now, obviously, gemi is not it's not a piece of clothing. So that wouldn't be, right? That's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chiya is saying. Gemi is allowed because that's not clothing, but it's tziltzul katan, a sash is a garment. Okay, so we had two versions of this machloket, which again, either Rabbi Yochanan and Rava disagree or Rabbi Yochanan and Rava agree. And then in both cases, we said that Rava certainly, right, Rabbi Yochanan definitely disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, but Rava doesn't really, because Rava can say, even though there's a minimum shiur required, not for tziltzul katan, because that already has significance, and that's going to be a problem even without the minimum amount. Okay, that was that sugya. Now we're moving on. We're going to have 6 questions of Rava. One question of Mar, the son of Rav Ashi, and one question from Rabbi Zera. And they all have to do with the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, and most of them about chatzitza or something else. Okay, we're going to talk about. And only Rabbi Zera's we're going to have an answer, and then we're going to have some difficulties with the answer that we get. So by Rava, the clothes, this is all coming from the clothes have to be al besaro. That's why we learned no chatzitza. They have to be on the body of the kohen. Okay? Nothing in between. What if there's air between, right? Sometimes you have, the wind comes and your shirt blows out. So what if your shirt blows out and there's wind and then it's not up against your body, right? It sounds like you have to wear tight clothing that's, right up against the body. But what if it's not and the wind comes and blows? The clothing having not to be tight, right? A ketonet is like a cloak. It wasn't tight around his body necessarily. So al b'saro b'inam b'haleka or dil derech levisha b'kach. Do you say you need it to be really up against his skin, and this isn't, or maybe saying no, that's just the way clothes are. It's fine. That means it's al b'saro. We say my clothes are on me, even if it's not up against my body. There's some wind in between. Okay. Second question, kina. They're not even going to try to answer these questions. Kina ma'u shetachotz. Okay, you have a lice bug. Okay, is that a chatzitza? Do we say now meta lo tibai devadai chaytza? Okay, if it's dead, for sure that's a problem. But chayamai, what if it's alive? This is a little bit strange. Why they think this, but I'm going to explain it as they say. I can't really explain it much better than that. And maybe because I don't understand their lice bugs and how they worked. But do we say since it comes and goes, okay, it's not going to stay there forever, right? It moves because it's alive. Maybe it's like a growth on your body. I don't know why they think it's like a growth on your body, but it's part of your body. I would think if it moves, it's, goes on and off, it would not be part of your body, but somehow they think maybe it's part of your body. Not exactly sure why. And therefore it wouldn't be a chatzitza, we call it an interposition. And it's something that interposes in between. Or maybe since you don't want it on your body, right? In general, when we talk about chatzitza and the mikvah, right? You can't have anything on your body. If it's something that you leave on all the time and you don't care to remove, well, sometimes we say that's not a chatzitza at all. But this you want to remove. You don't want it on your body. That already makes it a chatzitza. Okay, afal ma'ushi achotz. What if there's soil or dirt on your body? What about that? Afal vadai chaytza. They say, what are you talking about? That for sure is a chatzitza. Ela avak afarma. What if there's like a little bit of dust? Okay, like a teeny bit of dust from some dirt or something. Okay, because it's so insignificant, right? Beit hashechi ma'ushi achotz. Okay, your armpit. Now, okay, we're not talking about your armpit being an interposition here. What do we mean? Well, al b'saro b'ina v'haleka odema derech levisha b'kach. What they mean is, okay, look at my shirt, right? The most distance between the shirt and my body is by the armpit. There's usually just a big gap there, right? Where it's lower. It's the way most garments are made. Not all, but right, most garments are made like that. So right? And imagine he's wearing a cloak. There's going to be a much bigger space there. So is that a problem, right? Or not? So do we say al basaro b'inan, it has to be on his body, and it's not? Or do we say derech levisha b'kach, or that's just the way the cloaks are made? It's not an issue. Hichnis yado l'tochei komahu. If you put your hand on your chest, okay, under your hand is in between the garment and the body. So now what's the issue? Well, gufo michayetz olo. Do we say it's part of your body, your hand? So yes, it's true. It's right now in between a different part of your body, but it's part of your body. Usually, part of your body is not a chatzitza. But if you move it to be right in between, maybe it is. Nima ma'ush. What if it's like one strand, right? One thread came off of the garment. Is that chatzitza? Right, and it's there, or a hair. Nima vaday chatzitza. They say, of course it's a chatzitza. What do you mean? What if you have your garment starts shredding a little bit and there's a thread that's hanging loose, but it's still hanging on the garment. So it's part of the garment, which then we'd say it's not really a chatzitza. On the other hand, it's hanging and it would obviously be hanging off in between the garment and the body, right? Not hanging on the outside. That wouldn't be a chatzitza. It would be hanging on the inside. Is that a chatzitza? By Farber of Ashi. This is like the flip side of, your own body. Here it's the beged itself. By Farber of Ashi. Now, that was after the 6 questions of Rava. Now we're on the 7th. The Mar, the son of Rabbi Ashi, says, Yatsasa arobi bigdo mahu. What if your hair is there? Do we say saro kegufo dami, olav kegufo dami? Do we say hair is part of your body? Okay, now here we're talking about that the kohen had long hair. You might say, wait, the kohen's not allowed to have long hair. You have to cut your hair every 30 days. But if a kohen didn't care about that halacha, didn't cut his hair, and had his hair grow long, and the hair is now hanging, right? If your hair is long, could theoretically be under the shirt. We're not talking about hairs that are loose. That's for sure a chatzitza. But if the hair is on the body, do we consider hair part of the body or not? 8th question by Rabbi Zera. Tefillin ma'u. Are tefillin a chatzitza? Now, why would tefillin? First of all, right, tefillin you wear on your head, you wear on your arm, both places the kohen gadol has, the regular kohen has clothing there. So is that a chatzitza? Now, why would it not be? Well, we'll see. If you hold, which is what we hold, is that nighttime is not a time for tefillin. Okay, so Terry, you're asking a good question, which the commentaries talk about. Long hair doesn't disqualify the avodah, so apparently it doesn't. Okay, and this actually raises a big question. If someone's doing something against the Torah, can they actually do service in the temple, right? It's a crazy thought. Whole interesting thing about that. But we're not going to get into it today because we don't have time, but anyway, it is a good topic, and it does come a little bit out of this sugya. But here, this kohen went against the halacha, and yet is doing work in the temple. That's allowed. It seems crazy. Okay, so now we have this machloket. Do you wear tefillin at night or not? If you say you don't wear tefillin, right? Lav is not zman tefillin. Then kevan de laila chaytze. Now, which means that if you're wearing tefillin at night when it's not the time for tefillin, for sure it's a chatzitza. Okay, and therefore yom nami chaytze. Well, then we're going to say also daytime. If it can be a chatzitza half the hours of the day, of the night, then all the hours of the night, then of course it's going to be a chatzitza during the day. You can't have something that half a day it's going to be a chatzitza, half the day it's not. Ki tibailach, and now we'll finally understand what the question is. Manda amar laila's man tefillin, mai mitzvah de gufay chayitz, a lo chayitz. It's what this is a mitzvah on your body, and it's a mitzvah that you love doing, and you want the tefillin to be there. So maybe it's actually not a chatzitza. Okay, now it's hard to understand because you do take your tefillin off to go to the bathroom, right? For other things, I mean, nowadays we take our tefillin off after, people wear tefillin in the morning, they take them off, they're done. But in those days, they would wear tefillin all day. So even though they do take them off to go to the bathroom or something, but, right, it's in general, they would leave them on all day. And some of the commentators say because of the love of the mitzvah, perhaps we're going to say this isn't a chatzitza. Well, igal gil miltu mata the kamei to Rabbi Ami. So this question floated around. It gets before Rabbi Ami. Amarle Talmud aruchu biyadenu tefillin chotzitza. Says we have a tradition tefillin or a chatzitza. Okay, so the kohen can't be wearing tefillin when he does the avodah. Meitive. Now they're going to bring a contradiction from an inference from a source. Not really what the source says. Source says, Kohanim ba'avodatam u'leviyim b'duchanam v'Yisrael b'ma'amadan. Okay, these are 3 groups of people who had jobs in the temple. Kohanim, and they were doing their work in the temple. The Leviyim, who would stand on the duchan, play musical instruments and sing. And the Israelim who would come, there was always a group of people, there were mishmarot for all these. But the Kohanim, Leviyim, there were, a Torah, like different weeks, it was your job to come. There were people from Am Yisrael who would come, the Israelim weren't Kohanim or Leviyim, who would also have a rotation. They would come and pray that the korban be accepted. It's like the earliest form of prayer that we have, a formal prayer. Not informal prayer that we have earlier, but this is the first formal prayer we have. the mamadot. So when they're doing that, ptulim min atfilah min atfilin. Okay, it's interesting because they did pray in the mamadot, so it's a good question what it means they're doing from tefillah. But these are basically once when they're doing their job, they're basically praying for the korban to be accepted. They don't have to do other prayers, and they're ptur from tefillin, and the kohenim also, the leviim, they're all pturim from those things. Why? Osek b'mitzvah petra min mitzvah. They're busy doing a different mitzvah, so they're exempt from another one. Now, it says they're exempt. It sounds like if they want, they could put them on. So my love, so doesn't it sound like, well, if they did put them on, that would be fine because it didn't say they can't. Well, lo, they say no. If they put them on, it would be chotzet. It didn't say anything about it. It's just an inference. It says they're exempt, and if they put them on, it's a problem. To which they say, it shouldn't say pturim then. It should say it's forbidden. Right? Why does it say they're exempt? It should say you can't wear it. Now, what's the problem? Well, there's three groups of people there. It's not just kohenim listed in that braita. Right? There's two other groups of people that there's no prohibition. There's no chatzitza issue, right? No extra clothing issue. So basically, that's they're going to be pturim. How they say, okay, second difficulty. So that inference was not a difficulty. You could say it really meant they're exempt, and in fact, the kohenim, if they wear them, it's a problem. By the way, there's a machloket Rashi and Tosfot here. If we're talking about chatzitza or yitur begadim, okay, that's also another interesting thing here. Is the issue extra clothes or is the issue chatzitza? That there's something in between their clothes and their bodies. Okay, it seems to be Tosfot sounds like a better pshat, that it's in between their clothes and their bodies, and that's why we had the whole thing. If you only wear it during the day and the night, that's like usual laws of chatzitza. Okay, not yitur begadim. But anyway, so it says in another brayta, there's no chatzitza. So how do you relate to that? We're now going to make a big distinction. When he said it's a chatzitza, that was the yad because there's clothing there. When he said the rosh, right, the one that says there's no chatzitza problem is because we're talking about the rosh. There's no chatzitza there. So now the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Mishna. So why do you say yad is so clear? Because you wear, right, the clothes there. To rosh namikti, v'samtam it's nefet al rosho. All the kohanim wear a mitznefet, a turban on their head. Chatzitza, no? And I see you're saying, Miriam, about the tzitz. We'll talk about that. But here they're talking about all kohanim even. Tana sa'aro hayan nireh ben tzitz lamitznefet. Well, there's brayta that says when the kohen gadol will wear the tzitz, which was this head plate that the kohen gadol would wear, that would be miratzeh, would atone for any sins of tum in the mikdash. So when he had that plate on and he had his mitznefet, the turban was further back on his head, and se'ar hayan nireh, you would see hair in between. Shesham menichim turning out amubet, shesham menichim tefillin. That's where they would put their tefillin. So that means the mitznefet was so far back that the tefillin, there's no chatzitza there. And it's not a problem with the tzitz either because that was more forward. So that's how we have no problem with the tefillin shel rosh. Okay, and that's how we resolve the second contradiction. Okay, finished now with all the clothes. Now we're moving on to mechusar kippurim. Just as an aside, in the Mishnah, mechusar kippurim came before mechusar begadim. So the Rambam in his Perush Mishnah has the order reversed. And if you look in the Masorah Shas on the Mishnah, which is the little notes on the side, they say that the Rambam's girsa is a more correct girsa based on our Gemara, because mechusar kippurim came after mechusar begadim. Okay, whereas right in the Mishnah it's flipped, and that's just a side point. Okay, I'm a Rav Huna, I'm a Kra. So how do we get mechusar kippurim that the work is disqualified? So he says the pasuk says v'chiper ala kohen v'tahera. This is about a woman who gives birth. It says that she brings her korban on day 40 or 80, depending on whether she has a boy or a girl. Sort after it's day 41 and day 81. It says v'tahara. The chiper ala kohen, he atones for her by bringing her korban for her. Right? She doesn't bring it; he does the sacrificing, and she is pure. Now it's weird; she's already pure from the day before. She goes to the mikvah on day 40 or day 80. So why does it say she becomes pure at that point? Michal sheitmeah. It sounds like we call her, even though she's not really, but we call her impure until the sacrifice is done, which means that basically anyone who's a mechusar kippurim, now we're jumping to the kohen, same thing for the kohen. The kohen is mechusar kippurim, supposed to bring a korban, doesn't bring it yet on day number 8, let's say he's a zav or a metzora, a leper. So he's still considered tamei. And what do we learn? Tamei, also their work is disqualified. So that's how we get it. This we already saw in yesterday's stuff, right? That from Mechusar Begadim. They thought first they were learning it from Shtuyei Ayin, but then they said that we were learning both these from Shtuyei Ayin. Then they said in the end, no, it's really from Mechusar Begadim, because it says, by tak right kunat olam or something, kunat olam, in the pasuk about the clothes. From there you learn while the clothes are on, you're a kohen. If not, it's like you're a zar, and a zar, their work is disqualified. And then it says chok there, and it also says chok by the Richutz Yadayim v'Raglayim. This is washing the hands and the feet. We're going to talk a lot about this later, so we'll get into it later today's daf. Starting now, but it says chukah there, which we'll see the pasuk later, and therefore we learn that it's a problem. Okay, it's also disqualified. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, now we get to Yom Kippur, which is great because it was just Yom Kippur yesterday. Kohen gadol shelo taval v'shelo kidesh ben beged lebeged ubein avodah lavodah va'avad avodato kshera. Kohen gadol on Yom Kippur has to do also richutz yadayim v'raglayim. It's called lekadesh yadav v'raglav. When does he do it? Every time he changes his clothes. Remember, he goes back and forth, different clothing. Every time he changes his clothes, he has to go to the mikvah. But before he goes to the mikvah and after he goes to the mikvah, he does kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Okay, so 5 times he dunks in the mikvah. 10 times, because 5 times, right? Each time 2, 1 before, 1 after. Actually, a machloket about the ones before, whether he does it before his clothes, before he takes his clothes off, then takes his clothes, he does kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, washes his hands, takes his clothes off, goes to the mikvah, then puts his clothes back on, and then does the second washing. Or is the first one, everyone agrees the second one is after he puts his clothes back on. We're going to talk about that at the very end of today's daf. But the ones before, there's a machloket, whether first he takes his clothes off, then does the kiddush, or first does the kiddush and then his clothes off. Okay, that's just a side point, which will come up later, so I figured I'd mention it. Either which way, he does these 10 things. Now, if he didn't do the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, or even, okay, shelo kiddush yadav v'raglav, okay, if he, and lo taval, he didn't go in the mikvah, still his avodah is kshera. Okay, we're going to have to find a source for this. Achad kohen gadol ve'achad kohen idiot shelo kiddush yadav v'raglav shacharit ve'avad. But if they didn't do it in the morning, okay, everybody has to do it in the morning in the temple. You didn't do it in the morning, and then you did the service, avodato psula. So what we basically learn is the kohen gadol does it in the morning of his, right, before he does anything in the morning. Forget about the other 10. He ends up doing 11, really, because he does one in the morning when he gets to the temple. As long as you do that one, that covers you. Again, not ideally. You're supposed to go to the mikveh and the 10 right times. But if you didn't do it, it's okay. How they did it, we're going to also get to later today. Amalei Rav Asi le Rabbi Yochanan. Michti chamesh tfilah asara kiddushin deoraita v'chuka ktiv behu li'atvu. He says, I don't understand. Rav Asi says to Rabbi Yochanan. It says in the Torah now, it's inferred, okay? But it comes out of the psukim that you have to do the 5 tefillot and the 10 kiddushin. So, and it says at the end of the whole section of what we read in the shul yesterday, chukah. Okay, it says the word chukah. We said when it says chukah, it means it's ma'akeh. So how could you say this is not essential? Amar le, amar kra ulevesham ma'akeh. The chukah that refers to in that pasuk where it talks about the richutz yadayim v'raglayim, it also says in that pasuk v'rachatz besaro b'mayim. Okay, that's where it says at the end of the pasuk. It's vayikra tet zayin daled ulevesham. Now it already said he wore the clothes. So why does it say levesham a second time? Remember, 2 times means likuf. Means has to be, meaning he has to wear the clothes. Okay, he has to wear the different clothes, but that is ma'akev, ve'ein davar acher ma'akev. So basically the double, you wouldn't need the double language if chukah referred to everything. So what they're basically saying is, the double mention here is saying specifically on this issue, this is ma'akev, but not for the rachatz yadayim v'raglayim. Okay, so now that's what we learned, it's not ma'akev. Tzavu panav. Okay, so when Rav Asi got this answer from Rabbi Yochanan, he was all excited. Came Rabbi Yochanan though and said, Amarle, vav ufta katvelach. I wrote you a vav on a piece of wood. Okay, now a vav on a piece of wood with the grain, right? If you etch in a vav, it kind of looks like the grain itself. It's not noticeable at all. So he said, I didn't really do anything noticeable, meaning this wasn't a good explanation. Okay, it's like I wrote you a vav on a piece of wood. That wasn't, okay, it's nice I gave you an answer. It wasn't a good answer. It's kind of funny when somebody says that about their own answer. Why? Because yihachi safranami, then you wouldn't even need the one in the morning. Okay, so let's come up with something else. So we're now going to have Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Chizkiah, Amar Kra. Vaytal lahem chok olam ulizaro lidorotav. So now, if you look at the pasuk, we're going to look at 2 sections in Sefer Shemot. One is chapter 30, where it talks about the Shiur, and it says, okay, remember in Shemot, talks about the commandment to make all the vessels, and then it talks about when they actually did. So when it talks about the commandment, it says, okay, and there's a whole section, flashback this week is all about the Shiur if you want to learn more about it. It also comes up in a Mishnah in Yoma, also apropos about the person who made 12 spouts in the right. He added all these extra spouts so there'd be more room for the kohanim. There are all these people who are mentioned Latov that they did good things at the temple. Anyway, that's a side point because we're going to get to how many spouts it has to have minimally, and it's not 12. So anyway, vasita kior nechoshet. Okay, so make a kior at nechoshet. Okay, we're going to skip a little bit. Rachatzu Aharonu banav mimenu. So that's for Aaron and his sons to wash their hands and their feet. Bivoam, we're going to darshan these psukim later. When they come into Olam Moed, your chatzumayim, v'lo yamutu, and they won't die. O bigishtam al mizbech, or when they get close to the altar. We're going to darshan these two languages later. Lisharet, to serve. Laktir ishel Hashem. We're going to end with that today. And to burn the parts on the altar, the parts of the meat on the altar. They should do this and they won't die. It says this is a chok olam for him and his descendants after. Now, what are they going to point out here? Well, the kohen, right? It has to be something. Something that his children have to do is essential for him as well. But if davar she'eino ma'akev b'zaro, his children don't have to do, which is Aaron's children, only one of them was a kohen gadol, but not the others. So anything that relates to a kohen gadol specifically is not ma'akev as relates to this, and that's where they get it from. Rabbi Yochanan darshans it kind of similarly, but from a different pasuk. Amar mehacha, at the end of Shemot, mamash at the very end, it says they put the Shiur in its place. V'rachatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aaron ubanav. Who's going to wash? Moshe, Aaron, and his sons. Yedehem ve'reglehem. Now, it says here, Davar ma'akev b'banav, ma'akev bone. Notice it mentions again Aaron and banav, so it's going to be the same idea. Something that his sons have to do is essential. But Davar she'em ma'akev b'banav, em ma'akev bo. If it's not ma'akev, if sons don't have to do it like the 5, right, the 10 on Yom Kippur, then it's not essential that the Kohen Gadol do it either. So now Rabbi Yochanan, my time alone, Amar Chizkiah. Why didn't he take Chizkiah's proof? Amar Lacha, Ahu lidorotu dichtiv, because that said chok lidorotav, right, for generations. It was trying to tell you, this is for generations. That was the focus of the pasuk, not who, him and his sons, right? Something the gave his sons. Idach, my time alone, Amar Mehai. What about the last pasuk we just read? Why didn't Chizkiah hold by that? Because he needed it for something else. And here come the minimum number of spouts. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Kol kior she'en bo kadei lekadesh arba'a kohanim mimenu, en mekadshim bo. You need space for 4. If it doesn't have 4, it's no good. Shene'emar v'rachatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aaron ubanav, because they mentioned 4 people here, so it has to have 4 spouts. The guy who added 12 was just doing it for convenience sake, right? So more people could do it at the same time. Okay, now we get to how did they do this? Tana Rabbanan, kitzam mitzvah kiddush. Okay, you ever play Twister? This is like Twister, okay? Miniach yado hayemanit al gabe raglo hayemanit, okay, or you could call it yoga, okay? You put your right hand on your right foot, v'yado hasmalit al gabe raglo hasmalit. Now you have to bend down, and you put your hands, each hand on the appropriate foot, the same foot, umikadesh. And then basically, you open the spout, I guess, before, and you go down, and then it washes your hands and feet at the same time. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, maniach shtei yadav zo al gav zo, ve'al gabe shtei raglav zo al gav zo, umikadesh. This is much more complicated. But one foot on the other, one hand on the other, and it's all balanced in one place. So Amrullah, the rabbi said, Iflalta, you exaggerated it completely. Yefshalas, okay, nobody could do that. Shapir Kamerle. So they say, yeah, that was a good question they asked. How does he explain himself? So Amarav Yosef, b'chavero mesayo. You have a friend helping him to balance himself. Okay, he leans on a friend. My benai, what's the difference between them? Another Yom Kippur related issue. Midam and atzad ika benai. If you're standing but leaning on something or someone, is that valid standing, right? You think about him stand on the ila, right? You lean on your chair sometimes because you're getting tired. Is that considered standing or not? Now, obviously, the chiyuv to stand in ila is not the same as the chiyuv to stand when you're doing the avoda. Okay, so anyway, the point being, can he lean on someone or not? So the rabbis didn't think so, and that's why they disagree with Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. He thought it was fine. Amalei Rav Sama Breder Rav Ashi the Ravina v'leitav meitav l'kadosh. Why can't he sit while he's washing his hands? It's not exactly service, right? It's not part of the sacrificial rites. Amar kral lisharet v'sherut mu'umadu, but it says in the pasuk lisharet. Now there it merely means he's doing it so he can go serve. But because it says lisharet in the pasuk, they say you have to be standing. So again, you're not exactly standing; you're bowed down, but you're balancing right on your feet. Tanu Rabbanan, kidesh yadav raglav b'yom. We're now starting a big machloket that's going to continue into tomorrow's daf, the discussion about this machloket. If you did it in the daytime, Ain't tzarich l'kadesh balayla. And you continue to work throughout the nighttime, it's fine. You don't have to redo it. But balayla tzarich l'kadesh bayom. If you did it at night, or you were done at night, then you have to, again, even if you stayed in the temple and were still working, every morning you have to do it again. Okay? It's like a daily thing. Divrei Rebbe. Okay, it also is, as soon as you have what we call hesech hadat, like you said, I'm not going to do this anymore, right? I'm done with my work, you would have to do it again. But if you were still continuing to work in the temple without any break, okay, we're going to see it. Like if you go to the bathroom, actually, you're going to have to do it also. But let's say you didn't go to the bathroom, you just continued, you don't have to do it. Now, there weren't sacrifices tonight, but there were things they dealt with that night in the temple. So if you kind of were there all night and like not really having a break, like you were still focusing on the work, you didn't have to be working all night, but kind of in the temple still, you would still have to do it in the morning. Well, remember, if you leave the water overnight, okay, there's this thing of the muchni, they would keep it down in the ground, this whole thing. But we're going to talk about it tomorrow. If you left it overnight, it would be a problem. Okay, so therefore, overnight, whatever you washed your hands with yesterday, you kind of have to do it again. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, it's not a problem. Okay? Meaning, if you're still in the temple and you're still focused on it, okay, even if you're not working, you're still focused, not a problem. Okay, you don't have to do it again. Tanya Idach, now we're going to have another bright that sounds exactly the same. If you were dealing with the sacrifice all night, again, the parts that were still burning on the altar throughout the night, Le'ora, in the morning, you need to do it again, Divrei Rabbi. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, you did it from the beginning. You have up to 10 days. Now, obviously, you have to go to the bathroom. He's obviously exaggerating. Okay, no one's not going to go to the bathroom for 10 days. But what he means is, as long as you don't have any break, you just continue going. Utsricha, why do you need them both? Well, the first one didn't say you were still doing the exact avoda, right, working all night. So you might have thought that's why he says it. If you were working all night with the stuff, you might say, maybe he would agree that you don't have to wash them in the morning. And obviously, in the same logic, if you only had the second one, you would say maybe that's where only if you were still doing the work would he say that. But in the other, maybe he agrees with Rebbe, and therefore it's tzrich. That's why you need them both. My time at the Rebbe. So what's his reason? Bigishtam, when you go to do the work. So basically, every time you come, right, and if like the morning is a new thing. My time at the Rebbe Lazar Rabbi Shimon. Bivoam says when you come in, but now you're in already, right? And he says bigishtam al-mizbeach, right? You're going to do a new avoda in the morning, right? New avoda. You're going to the altar to sacrifice sacrifices. So you got to do it again. But Rabbi Shimon says, it says when you come into the temple, you're already stayed in the temple now, so you don't have to do it again. So now they say, okay, so idach nami akti bivoam. What's the Tanakama going to do with bivoam? Rebbe. So they say, ikti bigishtam velokti bivoam. If you said that, havamin al kol gisha al gisha. Kata brachmana bivoam. If it had just said bigishtam and it didn't say bivoam, I would have thought, on every gisha you need it. That's why it says bivoam. No, one gisha, but still overnight it's going to disqualify it. V'idach nami hakti bigishtam. Okay, what are we going to say about Rabbi Elazar? It says bigishtam. How does he explain that? So ikti bivoam velokti bigishtam. Right, sounds like in the morning you're going to need a new one. So if it had just said when you come in hava amina filu abiyari kani, you might have thought you have to do it even just for coming in. Bigishtam tells you no, only for coming in to do a service. So, right, biyari kani means you're just coming in not to do anything. Maybe everyone who comes in has to wash. No, you only have to wash if you're planning to do avoda. That's why it says bigishtam according to Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. So they say biyari kani aktiv l'sharei, but it already says in the pasuk to serve. Obviously, it would be to serve. You don't need bigishtam to teach you that. So let's try a second explanation. Ela bigishtam mibai leilchid Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov hakomo di mekidush sheni shu lavush mekadesh. This goes back to what I said before about the kohen gadol. Bigishtam is to teach you this other drasha completely about the kohen gadol. When he goes, the second time, right, when he takes off, when he does the second kiddush after, it's for sure when he's wearing his garments. Why? Remember, I told you there's a machloket about the one before. Is it with the clothes on, without the clothes on? For sure, after he dunks, he has to get dressed and then do it. Why? Kiddush Shadam Raglayim, it says here, bigishtam. You have to then, my time, at the Amarka, o bigishtam, misha eino mechusar ela gisha bilvad. It has to be someone who, as soon as they wash, they can then go right to the altar. Now, if you're not wearing the clothes, you can't go right to the altar. So out is the one who needs also to get dressed and also to go. Last thing, laktiri shel lamali. Why does it say in the end of that pasuk to burn the parts on the altar? Well, ma'u detema hanimili avoda de ma'akva kapara, aval avoda de lo ma'akva kapara lo kamash malan. Because you might have thought maybe kiddush tadayim v'raglayim is only needed for work that's essential. Remember the 4 avodot, or 3 or 4, right? However we count them. But for sure, the burning parts on the altar we've seen many times is not essential part of the avoda. They're saying even for that you have to do kiddush tadayim v'raglayim. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with the whole issue of Yitor B'gadim. We started really with this refuah issue, but moved right from there to Yitor B'gadim and Chatzitza. But more really Yitor B'gadim, extra clothing, what's considered extra clothing, and the different machlokot, and who really disagrees with who. From there, we moved to the Mechusar Kippurim, what's the source? The Rechutz Hadayim for Raglayim, what's the source? And then we got into all sorts of issues about Rechutz Hadayim for Raglayim, including, right, this whole issue that we're getting into more tomorrow about this machloket between Rebbe and Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon about whether Lina is mo'elet. Does Lina mess up? Does the nighttime mess up? Just like it messes up korbanot, right? If you didn't do it that night, you can't do it the next morning, right? The nighttime kind of disqualifies a lot of things. Does it mess up your Kiddush Hadayim v'raglayim? Do you need to do a new one? Or if you were still in the temple, still focused on it, still, right, still working possibly, right? Then maybe you don't need to do it. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, a Shana Tova, and we'll meet up again on Sunday.